boys and girls. We're going to begin history today by reading on page 108 in our book. It says, New England Town Meeting. For 150 years, the colonies grew and flourished. That means they were really healthy and strong. In the mid-1700s, England began to impose many regulations on the colonies. They put laws and taxes and things on them. The question had to be asked, were these acts constitutional under English law? When the colonies had no representation in English Parliament, Parliament was their governing body where they would send representatives, like we have the Senate. Parliament is where the English people send representatives to make decisions and laws and impose taxes. But the colonists didn't have any representatives in Parliament. Discussions took place throughout the colonies, in homes and in public meeting houses. In New England, the town meeting was a forum for these discussions. Do you remember the moots, which were held by the Germanic tribes, especially the Saxons? At the moot, the issues concerning the local community were considered and decisions were made. This same idea of local self-government was found in the town meetings of New England. So let's go back to page 41. We're going to read about the moots. I thought these were very interesting. This was a long time ago, back in the 800s, 900s AD. We're on page 41, chapter 9, our Anglo-Saxon heritage. Heritage, that which is inherited from an ancestor. So the Anglo-Saxons are the ancestors of the English, who were the ones that founded the New England colonies. And this is something they've inherited from their way back ancestors. Reading in the book, the Saxons and other Germanic tribes of Northern Europe were people with remarkably strong character. That strong Anglo-Saxon character was brought to the American colonies in the New World. Therefore, it is part of our heritage as Americans. The brave, warlike spirit of the Anglo-Saxons caused them to defend their land with great vigor. Their love of freedom created a society based upon the free man or freeman. Their fierce independence produced a unique form of government within their tribes. Unlike the Romans, who were ruled by Caesar and his appointed governors, the Germanic tribes were not ruled by one king or ruling class. Instead, each tribe made its own distinct laws and governed itself. This is local self-government. In these tribes, the men attended meetings and discussed the business of the tribe. The Saxons called these council meetings moots, from their Saxon word motian, which meant to meet or to debate or discuss. The decision of the majority settled matters for their own tribe. So the men would all meet and they would talk about something, and whatever the most of people wanted, that's what they did. These are small groups of people, maybe, 40 or 50 men. Since the decisions and laws were made by the men of the tribe themselves, I'm reading at the bottom of the page now, right there. Since the decisions and laws were made by the men of the tribe themselves, they were both powerful and effective. Remember when we talked about how the people on the Mayflower were very willing to follow the Mayflower Compact? Why? Because they were the ones that wrote it. So they had all the control over what it said, and once they had written what they felt was right, then of course they would agree to it and follow it. The same with these guys. Very last line at the bottom of this page. The Saxon laws were enforced locally by those who had made and agreed to them. This was very different from the Roman government, which enforced its laws by sending soldiers to make the people obey. The law established in the Saxon council meetings was not written. The members of each tribe, village, or town knew the law because they had helped to form it. In turn, they explained and enforced the law in their own families and tribes. So a tribe might be a smaller group of all the people who met at the council. Children learned the law from their fathers. When they became adults, they taught it to their own children. In this way, the law was passed from one generation to the next. When the Saxons conquered Britain, they carried their ideas of local self-government and law with them. Okay, we won't read the rest of the chapter, but now you remember what we learned about those guys. So let's look at the questions on history number 17. The first question asks, excuse me, what year did the Pilgrims arrive in North America? I don't know, everybody, what year? 1620, that's right. So make a complete sentence out of that. Don't just write 1620. The Pilgrims arrived in North America in 1620. I'm just going to write 1620 so you remember the number. So make me a complete sentence there, please. For 150 years, the next question says, the people of New England, that's the northern colonies we talked about last time, governed themselves. The colonies grew and flourished, it says in the book. What date are we now talking about? So we went from 1620, 150 years forward, 0 to 0, 0, We're talking about the 1770s now. 150 years of people living here, having children, and their children having children, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, for 150 years. More people moving over here, cities growing, people building factories, well, not factories yet, people building homes and churches, building lots of ships. We're going to learn about that in the next section. Fishing, farming, raising their children, 150 years of that. So you're going to make a sentence, something like, we are now in the 1770s. Let's put that. We are now in the 1770s. What happened in 1776? Hello? Yes, what? Declaration of Independence, beginning of the Revolutionary War. So we're at about that time in history. We've jumped forward. So, next question. During this 150 years, the people of New England governed themselves at what are called town meetings. How were these meetings similar to the moot of the Saxons that existed 800 years before? We already read this. We went back and read that before we started talking about these questions. So let's fill in 6 ways that they were similar. Be right back. Point number 1. Each growing man was expected to attend and vote. This is before women were voting, but the men would represent their wives and children in their vote. They wouldn't vote selfishly for their own purposes, but for what was best for their family. So write that down. That's point number 1 of how this town meeting was a lot like the moot. Number 2, they taxed themselves. They decided if a tax needed to be paid, what it was for, how much it was, and then they taxed themselves and they all paid it. That's the second point. Number 3, selectmen were chosen to carry out the business of the town. So if a road needed to be built or the town square needed to be repaired, these men were in charge of those sorts of things. They could hire someone to do it, but they were the ones that actually were in charge of the business of running the town. Sort of like a city councilman would be now, or a city employee. All right, here's number 4. The town clerk kept a record of all the votes in the town meeting. So these are people running their own town. Nobody from the outside is doing this for them. So you need to pause the video to write these things down. Go ahead and do that. All right, we're going to do the last 2. Be right back with the last 2. Number 5. The town treasurer received the tax money and all the town's funds. So if somebody had to pay for repair of the road in front of their house because of something where they damaged it, then they would pay the money to the town, and the treasurer would take care of keeping that and paying the road repair people. And then one more thing, also in the New England communities, a school committee was chosen to oversee the schools. So these are ways that the New England colonies governed themselves, and the men and women of the town did the deciding, not like in the Roman times where the emperor sent in his army and made people follow the rules. These people made the rules, made the decisions about how they wanted things to run, and then they ran it, or they appointed people to do that for them. So you should have written those 6 points on your paper right here. Let's go on. Why is it correct to call this form of government self-government? Well, who was running it? The people themselves. So the people themselves ran their own government. What is government again? Just direction, control, and restraint to protect life, liberty, and property. That's all government should be. Next question. So you put what you think right there. Why this is correct, why it would be correct to call this form of government self-government? Because they did it themselves. When England began, we're going to read this next question now. When England began to put new laws and taxes on the colonies, especially in the 1760s and 1770s, why did the colonists object to these laws? And we find that answer in the first paragraph of the page we began reading in the textbook. Because they had no representation in the English Parliament. So the colonists objected because they had no say in the decision. They had no vote about the taxes. It was just done to them. They had no representation in the English Parliament. See if you can come up with your own way of putting that. Make a complete sentence. The colonists objected to these laws and taxes because, and then you put why. Next one, where did they meet to discuss the unjust treatment of the king? And that's what the next paragraph we already read told us. Discussions took place throughout the colonies. In New England, the town meeting was a forum or a place for these discussions. So they met, they discussed these things in the town meeting. Plural. They discussed these things in the town meetings, you can put. Let's finish reading the page here, page 108, and then we'll answer the last question. So we're picking up right here at the bottom of the first column on 108. Each town operated as a little republic, holding annual meetings to discuss local affairs. When an issue of concern to the community arose, a special town meeting was called. Annual means once a year. So once a year they met to make major decisions, but if they had a problem they needed to solve, they would call a special meeting. The purpose of the meeting was announced so that all the inhabitants of the town could attend. In the town meeting, each individual had the right to express his opinion and take part in the discussion. When the matter being discussed required a decision, each man had the liberty to vote, and each vote was of equal value. Historian John Fiske recorded, he said, "The period when town meetings were most important was the period of earnest and sometimes stormy discussions that ushered in our Revolutionary War." In other words, the time of discussing, what are we going to do? England's doing this. We've tried to do this. They're not listening. What are we going to do? They would talk about, what does the scripture say? They would pray about it. They would discuss it some more. Back in the book. In those days, great principles of government were discussed with a wealth of knowledge and stated with masterly skill in town meetings. So that would be an answer to our last question. Why were the town meetings so important during the years before the American Revolution? Because it was a place for people to get together and discuss and decide and figure out, how are we going to deal with all these injustices from England? And many good ideas came out of these meetings. So let's compose an answer to this one. Remember that at this point in time, no nation had ever been self-governed. They'd always been governed by a king or some other kind of ruler who could just make people do whatever he wanted, basically. So you can put it in your own words if you'd like, but this is the idea we want to put on the last question. It was at the town meetings that the colonists decided what a just government should look like. Just meaning a government of justice. What a good government would look like. So this is where they sat and they talked and they figured it out. They looked at their Bible, they spoke with their pastors, they talked to each other, and people would come up with ideas and someone else would say, I don't know, that just doesn't seem quite right. There's something about that part of it I don't like, or this part of it I don't like. And they would talk and they would just work it out till they came up with what a just government would look like. And this is our heritage. This is where our country started. We've gotten a long way from that in some respects, but God's people are strong and we can still get back to a just form of government. See you again soon.